Today's lesson is going to be how to rationalize denominators of fractions. So if you look at this, we have 15 square root of 6. Well, 15 over square root of 6 has a square root of 6 in the denominator. Well, if you think about what type of number the square root of 6 is, that's called an irrational number. I want my denominator to only have rational numbers in it. So this is an irrational number. So I need to get that irrational number to become a rational number. So the way that I do that is I have to change the way that 15 over square root of 6 looks by multiplying by a number that doesn't change it. Well, multiplying by 1 doesn't change this number. So I choose to multiply by the square root of 6 over the square root of 6. The reason that I do this is because 15 times the square root of 6 is just the square root of 6. You multiply these two together. 15 is on the outside of the radical, 6 is on the inside of the radical. When you multiply, you get 15 square root of 6. Over, when you multiply the square root of 6 and the square root of 6, you get the square root of 36. Well, the square root of 36 is just 15 square root of 6 divided by 6. Then what happens is we have to reduce. Can we reduce any of this right here? 15 and 6, those are both outside the radical. We can reduce those. 15 divided by the square root of 6. Both 15 and 6 have a 3, so we can take out a 3. And you get 5 over 2. The 6 is inside the radical. It does not reduce with any of those other numbers, and that would be your final answer. Okay? B. If I rationalize B, I'm going to multiply by the square root of 3 and the square root of 3, because square root of 3 divided by square root of 3 is 1. So when we multiply, I get 5 square root of 3 over, when we do this, square root of 3 times the square root of 3 is really the square root of 9, but the square root of 9 is just 3. The reason we multiply by the square root of 3 is the square root of 3 times the square root of 3 multiplies, and just the 3 comes out. That's why we pick that. Then we try to reduce. 5 and 3 don't have anything in common. 3 is on the inside of the radical. That can't reduce. There's our answer. Same process here. Take this, multiply by the square root of 12, and you get 6 times the square root of 12 over 12. There should be the square root here. Now, we try to reduce. 6 and 12, those both reduce, so this becomes square root of 12 over 2. Okay? 6 divided by 12 is 1 over 2, or just the square root of 12. You don't need the 1, but you can put it there. It's not a big deal. But the square root of 12 is not reduced, because square root of 12 can become 4 times 3 over 2. Okay? And then 4 can become 2 times 2 times 3 over 2. So then what we do is we reduce our radical by doing one of the 2's coming out, one of them getting crossed off, so this becomes 2 radical 3 over 2. And 2 radical 3 over 2, the 2's get canceled, and we just have the square root of 3, and that is my final answer. So, what happens if we get something that looks like this? 7 over 5 plus the square root of 3. Well, this is a little trickier. So what we do is we multiply by the conjugate. Because we have addition here, we have to multiply still, but now we're going to, it's not just the square root of 3, because now there's addition or subtraction. So what we do is we multiply by the conjugate. And the conjugate is just taking this number and making it a minus sign. You just switch this sign right here in the middle. So we have a plus, we switch it to a minus on the top and the bottom. And when I do this, I now have to distribute. This 7 gets multiplied by both numbers. That becomes 35 minus 7 square root of 3. Over, now I have to distribute this 5 and this 3 into all of that. So 5 times 5 is 25. 5 times the square root of 3 is a negative 5 square root of 3. Square root of 3 times 5 is a positive 5 square root of 3. And a square root of 3 times the square root of 3 is a negative 3. Now what happens is we combine our like terms. 35 and the square root of 3 can't combine. And 25 and negative 3 is 22. And negative 5 square root of 3 and positive 5 square root of 3 is 0. And my answer is this right here. Okay? Now, let's look at one of these other ones. So what do I do here? Okay. Well, here I have 2 square root of 3 minus 7. So I'm going to multiply by 2 square root of 3 plus 7. And 2 square root of 3 plus 7. Again, distribute. Negative 3 gets multiplied. Negative 3 times 2 is negative 6. And then use the square root of 3, just tax on the square root of 3. Negative 3 times 7 would be negative 21. Over. Do your multiplication. 2 square root of 3 times 2 square root of 3 would be 2 times 2, which is 4, times the square root of 3 and the square root of 3, because we have this number times this number. So the 2 times 2 is 4. The square root of 3 and the square root of 3 becomes 3. So those two have to get multiplied together. 2 square root of 3 times 7 would be positive 14 square root of 3. Negative 7 times that would be negative 14 square root of 3. And negative 7 and positive 7 would be negative 49. Now we combine like terms. Negative 6 square root of 3 minus 21, nothing can combine there, over 4 times 3 is 12. So that's this right here becomes a 12. So I have 12 minus 49 would be negative 37. 14 square root of 3, and negative 14 square root of 3 is negative 37. Then we look. This 6, this 21, and this 37, is there anything in common? There's not. So we have, that is our final answer. So then let's look at D. So on D, I'm going to multiply by 4 minus the square root of 5, and 4 minus the square root of 5. Leaving here. So that's going to be a minus sign here. Okay. Now we do our distribution. 8 times 4 is 32. 8 times the negative square root of 5 is negative 8 square root of 5. Over 4 times 4 is 16. 4 times negative square root of 5 is 4 negative square root of 5. Square root of 5 times 4 is a positive 4 square root of 5. And then square root of 5 times the square root of 5 is a negative, not 25, it's a negative 5. So we get this. Now we combine. Numerator doesn't combine. Okay. The denominator, we have 16 and negative 5, which would be 11. And the negative 4 square root of 5 and the positive 4 square root of 5 go to 0, and that would be your final answer.